Hey, cool kids. Welcome back into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm Greg Payne, and today we are talking about one of the greatest opportunities I think grandfathers have. And that's really about how we shape the lives of our grandchildren. And the way we're going to do that is through using our time together over the summer. Now, it doesn't exactly have to be over the summer. It could be a winter break. It could be a spring break. It could be some kind of just long holiday, whatever it is. But it's the kind of thing where you're going to be able to spend some meaningful time with the grandchildren. Now, in summer, what I love is that our way of influencing and having an impact, it's not the expensive kind of fun. It's not the Instagram perfect kind of thing that we do. And not every moment that we have with the grandkids has to be the magical kind. I'm talking about just an ordinary summer visit. Now, I'm talking about sticky popsicles and backyard projects, fishing poles that get tangled up in the weeds and the overhead branches. I'm talking about our late night conversations that could be held under porch lights or around the kitchen table. The smell of sunscreen and hamburgers, road trips with all the wrong turns, all that sort of thing is, what really adds up to summer memories. And one of the things too that can add up with summer memories and impact could be just sitting down quietly beside the grandkids while they're trying to make sense of growing up. I think for me, summer and my reflection upon the summers that I had is that summers create a great space and opportunity. The space is where the relationships really grow, and the opportunity is the time for being together, to having some one-on-one or one-to-many kind of interactions with grandkids and family. During the school year, kids are rushed from one thing to another. Parents are oftentimes exhausted. Their calendars are packed and everybody's just running at full speed. Now, when summer comes around, things tend to slow down a little bit. And I understand people are oftentimes wrapped up in different camps, whether it's scout camp or horse camp or band camp or football camp or soccer camp. So there's a lot going on, but things tend to kind of slow down just a little bit. And here's something that I think is important. Grandchildren often remember the small moments more than the big, expensive events. I mean, sure, they're going to remember that trip to Universal Studio or the cruise that you went on or the big trip, but the trip is the key to the memories of what you did. It's how you made them feel. So I remember that when I was with my grandfather and my grandparents, I really remember that they made me feel safe. They made me feel like they were listening to me. Now, they could have been thinking about a ton of different things, Paul Harvey, farm reports, whatever, but at least they gave me the impression, and my memories are that they were really listening to me talk about what was important to me. And so we do this with our grandchildren, or at least we're trying to do this with our grandchildren. And, when we do this, we really help the grandchildren feel that they're important to somebody who really matters to them. And sometimes those emotional bonds that we create become lifelines later in life, especially during the hard seasons that those kids are going to go through. They're going to experience things like divorce and moving, bullying, loneliness, anxiety, family tensions, and just the confusing years of adolescence of trying to figure out who they are and what they believe and where they fit in, not only in their peer groups, but within the family. A strong grandfather relationship can become the anchor that really helps them settle in and have a center that they can go out into the world and explore from. Not because we solve every problem, but because we consistently show up. And today we're going to talk about practical ways that grandfathers can use summertime visits and other holiday visits and those activities to build stronger relationships with grandchildren, and how those simple shared experiences can create emotional security that lasts for decades. So I invite you, go grab a cup of coffee, your iced tea, or maybe head out onto the porch and join me for a few minutes while we talk about becoming the kind of grandfather our grandchildren run towards and who go to when they need security. Now, summer always has a different rhythm, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. And when I think back to my childhood summers, I don't remember every detail of them, but I remember the places I was at and the way that they made me feel, where I felt like I could accomplish anything, where I felt like I had trust of my grandparents, where I felt like they could encourage me to make all sorts of and take all sorts of risks. Now, these were all calculated risks and safe and everything else, but a little boy climbing a tree higher than he ever climbed before, doing things like that. And, it's those adults who made me feel like I was noticed and valued. And grandchildren today are no different. I don't care if they've got screens and they've got year round school. And, heck, this year might be their only ninth summer or their 16th summer, where you and I may have had, 50 summers or 60 summers or 70 summers. But for them, every single summer is something new and unique. They're never the same person twice. And I know that's true for everybody. So I get that, but at the same time, like, they're only going to have one summer where they're 8 years old. They're only going to have one summer when they're 15 years old and might have a learner's permit. Next year, they're going to have a driver's license, and then they're going to be off doing whatever, and they'll be fully mobile. And so these are times where our influence and our time together with the grandchildren, either one on one or one to many, really comes in and really matters, because it allows for that unstructured connection. And that unstructured connection is where emotional trust grows, not during the school assignments that they have throughout the year, not during the forced life lessons that they have to experience where they get bumps and bruises along the journey of life, and not during those interrogations about grades and behavior or their future plans. Trust grows while we're doing things together, and summertime really allows this to happen. There's something powerful, I think, about a side to side connection. A grandchild helping you wash the car, going on a fishing trip, even if it's just a couple of hours down to the local lake or pond, a late night ice cream run. Those are awesome. Fixing an old bicycle together, building a birdhouse. The activity really does lower the emotional pressure for the grandchildren to, I don't know, perform isn't the right word, but feel like they're being interrogated. It's we're doing something, we're focused on something else besides them, even though secretly grandpas and grandmas, we are focused on those grandkids. But their perception is that we're focused on the task at hand, and the talking is secondary. And, often that's when we get the grandchildren to start talking, not because we demand it, but because they feel safe around us. They feel safe while we're doing an activity together. I had one grandfather told me that the deepest conversation that he had with a teenage grandson happened while untangling extension cords in the garage of all things. And honestly, that idea reminds me of the conversation that I had with Bob Abbott, I featured him last week on our Memorial Day podcast, but I talked to him a couple of years ago. And for those of you that don't know, Bob has spent years recording the oral histories of World War II veterans. One of the things that he said to me that really stuck was this: I'm here to listen, not to ask. And that line hit me because not only can you use that with veterans, but because grandchildren often open up the same way that those veterans did with Bob. They will start talking if they know that you're listening, not when they feel interrogated, not when somebody's forcing a conversation, but when somebody's just quietly willing to listen. That's one of the hidden gifts I think that we have in summertime activities is those side by side moments that create that emotional safety for them to really open up. And it's not during a planned heart to heart. It's in the garage. It's washing the car. It's running to the hardware store to get something. And the in the case of being back in that garage that we were talking about, that grandson suddenly opened up about feeling lost after his parents' divorce. And that grandfather, when I was talking with him, he was aware enough that he didn't try to fix those feelings. He didn't launch into a speech. He just simply listened to how his grandson was feeling. And I told that friend of mine that the simple act of listening is what matters most. And the more I have conversations with people, the more that I learn things, given all these 50 plus years of walking the earth, is that listening means so much to so many people. And it's not the fixing that we have to do as grandfathers. Our time, I really think, for fixing things, and this is in general, is pretty much over. Our chance now and our way that we work with kids, grandkids, and even other people is simply listening. And then when they're open to a suggestion or they're open to an insight, then we offer that. And I think sometimes that grandfathers, we underestimate that emotional weight that grandfathers that we carry, because they can come to us, they can talk to us, and if we're listening and not interrupting, man, they can really unburden themselves and they can give you so much information about what's going on in their lives. Now, one of the things that summer also does is create opportunities for stability, and that stability will create trust, and that trust is going to be something that just continues to build over time. I think one of the best things that grandfathers can do is invite those grandchildren into meaningful tasks, not entertainment all the time, but not constant screens, not being cruise directors and making everything super fun all the time, but really giving the kids a sense of belonging. And I think because they're surrounded by entertainment all the time and infotainment as well as they start to get older, I think they're like, where do I fit in? I'm hearing and seeing stories about everything. I'm hearing and seeing trailers about movies. I'm seeing YouTube videos and TikTok videos from people all over the world. Where do I fit into this big environment? And I think grandfathers can really help kids find that place where they belong. And I think if you think about it, most of us have learned through life going through and participating. We were handed tools by somebody. We helped to carry lumber or groceries. We learned how to rake leaves. We stood beside adults as they worked. And through those experiences, we absorbed many values and attributes. The most important, in my opinion, is confidence. I think grandchildren gain confidence by doing, and by doing and showing and impressing and getting positive feedback. And grandchildren need those opportunities. And summertime is perfect for this because it's a great time to involve them, to teach them how to grill, teach them how to change a tire, change the oil. Even if you have that stuff done, every once in a while, do it yourself and, have them help you. Teach those grandkids how to organize a tackle box, how to paint a room, how to read a paper map and orient themselves. But we can teach them how to pack for a trip, even if it's just a long weekend while they're visiting with us. And we can even teach them just simple travel tips. I know I had one grandfather that told me that he created a tradition with his granddaughters, and when they were visiting every summer, and the granddaughters and him, they kind of nicknamed themselves the breakfast crew. And every morning as the granddaughters were younger, they would cook breakfast together. And at first, of course, it was messy. You had burned pancakes and mutilated pancakes, and you had eggshells and pancake mix everywhere, and syrup was all over the place. But when we were talking about this, he said years later, those granddaughters told him that the kitchen conversations that they had making breakfast were some of the best moments of their childhood and during their summers, because while they talked or while they cooked, they were talking, and they were talking. The girls could talk about their friendships, their fears, about school insecurities, about life, about the music they liked, about the movies they liked, all sorts of things that sometimes they kids don't open up to grandfathers about. And that grandfather, man, he knew that the pancakes were never the point. It was the connection. It was doing things together. It was having that shared task that communicates something so powerful. And what it communicates to the grandkids is that you matter enough for me to include you in what I'm doing. And that really helps, I think, grandkids build up an identity. And for grandchildren going through unstable seasons, including divorce and moves, new blended families, and emotional stress, that sense of identity and belonging becomes an incredibly important part of their lives. Grandfathers can become that emotional stabilizer, not by being perfect, but by being present and being intentional. Fun, when it's used as a way of building connection, creates really fun emotional openings. Children can connect deeply with adults who know how to laugh and know how to play. And some grandfathers accidentally become too serious. I know that as we get older, sometimes we lose our sense of joking around. I know sometimes we lose some of the creativity that we had when we were younger. I think if we can resist the urge to become too serious, we can really use fun and play as a way to help build those connections. Because, I mean, grandchildren need to be able to laugh, to enjoy. They need silliness, and they need memories of us being silly, of doing silly things. And, I think summertime gives grandfathers permission to loosen up a little bit. Hey, go find a crazy beach shirt to put on, have a few water balloon fights, tell ridiculous stories, go miniature golfing, mix up some root beer floats, and camp out in the backyard if you want. Have some fun. I know I heard one person talk about grandfather had mentioned that they would create a bad joke jar. And while all the kids were together, all the grandkids, they had this bad joke jar. And these were all, your typical quote dad jokes and things like that and puns. And during the visit, every grandchild had to bring so many terrible jokes with them and submit those into the jar. And they would, pick out these jokes and run through them. And the winner for that week got to pick out the ice cream flavor for the week, so it was be strawberry or mint chip or chocolate chip or cookies and cream, whatever it is. And, nobody outside that family would think that tradition was important. But for those grandchildren growing up, that associating grandpa with joy and with fun and silliness, that creates emotional closeness, especially during those hard seasons when the kids really start getting in those middle school years and stuff gets awkward, or the child's dealing with anxiety, family tension. They're going to remember the person that brought some light and some levity into their life, and that emotionally safe person that they can go to for a laugh and who's going to hear 'em. So it was about fun. And now I want to go deep again for a little bit. And, I think sometimes grandkids can arrive for those summer visits carrying invisible weight. Now, if you're talking with your adult son and daughter, you're talking to their parents, chances are they've given you a heads up that maybe they're having a lot of fighting. There's things going on with the kid at school, whatever. And, part of that visit is to give them a break from their surroundings to kind of reorient themselves. So, sometimes those breaks, those kids are showing up and they've got a rain cloud over their heads. And it's a great way for us to really love and connect with those kids, because children don't always announce those struggles. Sometimes they're embarrassed as they get older. Maybe sometimes they feel like there's something wrong with them, that they don't know how to express themselves, that if they tell people that they're sad or they're angry, whatever it is, that people look at them weird. Maybe they've been fighting with mom and dad an awful lot. And grandfathers, we've got an incredible opportunity during these summer visits to really become a calm harbor for them. Not another storm, not somebody that's going to jump in with all sorts of suggestions on how to fix everything. And not another critic, but a harbor that will allow them to share as we go through these different activities that I just talked about. And that doesn't mean that we ignore the problems. It means that we create the emotional breathing room to give them time and space to start talking about it, because I think sometimes we can learn more about how they're interpreting events that may not be what other people have a view of those events. And sometimes that building that relationship can just be being consistent, while they're visiting with you, going on an evening walk, playing cards, playing checkers. I had one guest that she talked about when her grandmother started getting after her. Um, it was not being very nice. It was the grandfather that would take her into another room and they would sit and just play checkers, and kind of he used that as a way to shelter her from a bad situation. But when the kids visit, getting into predictable rhythms can help the children feel secure. I know when I was at my grandfather's, one of the things that we would always do is he would be up at the crack of dawn or before. I mean, it was insane. Farmers are crazy. But he was up and he was, taking care of the cows, and he was starting to turn on the irrigation, and he was doing all the things that farmers do, when it's still dark out and everybody with half a brain is still sleeping. But we knew that rhythm when we went out to his farm to visit. We knew what that rhythm was. We knew when he went into town to the co-op. We knew when he was going to gas up the tractors. We knew when he was doing all these things. We got into that rhythm with him, and that was really kind of comforting. And I think one of the things that we can do when we have kids and grandkids that show up that are having a tough time is, again, going back to, two eyes, two ears, one mouth, use them in proportion. And then also make sure that they know that there's no pressure when we invite them to go to breakfast with us. There's no pressure for them to talk. We can talk about scrambled eggs and bacon and how the food is, or what the traffic is like, or what the day's going to be. We don't need to talk about what's going on at home. And, I think sometimes as grandparents, we want to jump right in because we know something's going on. But if we have some time, we let them talk. And a lot of what I'm talking about is when grandkids come to visit you. This also works when you go to visit grandkids. So if you're taking that summer trip this year, go ahead, use some of this stuff, but you can use it at their home. And I think one of the biggest things with this is we know ahead of time kids are struggling, they've got a lot of weighty decisions on their minds, is just being able to provide that space where we're providing the calming presence, where we can have grounded conversations, because we've survived things. We know how hard life can be. And we also know what it's like when you move and when you have to say goodbye to friends. And we have all these experiences that we can help navigate the grandkids through just by our presence. So I want to pivot over, talk about technology and screens and real connection. And folks, let's be honest, screens are part of modern childhood. So honestly, instead of fighting over technology that can damage connection with the grandchildren, follow the parents' rules on this. If the kids are limited to so much screen time, just follow those rules, support the parents on this. There's no reason for you to start battling. There's also no reason for you to make a bunch of snarky comments about the kids playing Nintendo DS, about being on their Chromebooks or their iPads. But I think what we can do is we can use those summer visits to create a little bit of a balance. I think what we need to do is we need to be providing more meaningful alternatives. I mean, if we can't give them a better experience than what they can get on a phone or a tablet or whatever. And maybe that's some of our problems. Maybe we're on our devices too much and the grandkids see that and they think that we're giving them lectures about things that we don't really value. One of my friends started doing when the grandsons came to visit was he would take the grandkids out on what he would call a photo safari. And they would walk around on the greenway here and they would walk around at town, even around the block, and they would just let the kids take pictures of weird signs, old buildings, some interesting looking trees, I mean, weird insects that they would see, all sorts of different things. And they would then go back and they would start to put those things into an application where they could create almost like a little photo album or whatever. And, they're still spending time together, but they're being able to use technology. And the grandson is fully invested in that. I mean, they can't wait to go out and take some interesting pictures and then create something. It's almost like a photo scrapbook from their perspective and their interest on how they spent that time with the grandfather. Now, I do want to, excuse me, talk about, you know, that summertime is a perfect time for families to share stories. And one reason I believe this so deeply is that whenever I was out on my grandfather's farm or out in Oregon with my grandparents, I was always learning more every time we were out there, every 2 or 3 years or 5 years. It was during my visits that we would be driving on his postal route, setting up irrigation pipes, fishing trout in the Idaho mountains, whatever. That's when I learned the stories about his childhood, about him and his siblings, about how he grew up, and then also hearing stories about him serving in the Army Air Corps during World War II and his experiences with building a homestead in Oregon and creating and building the house that he had with his brothers. All of those things came through that time together over those summer vacations. And then when I had the opportunity to go spend Thanksgiving with them, I'd learn even more. So, don't forget that you're not there just to give advice. Our grandkids want to hear our stories. They want to hear who we were and what shaped us. What was our experience like in Little League? What was our experience like going through elementary school? They would be fascinated to learn. Grandkids love hearing so they can compare and contrast. And we also have a great opportunity with those stories to open up those emotional doors and get away from those lectures. I think sharing the stories about how things were tough for us too, and this goes back to those grandkids showing up that may be going through hardship, is being able to sit down and tell stories about how awkward we were when we were growing up, how we questioned everything, how we used to push back against a lot that our teachers and our parents may have been trying to teach us, and letting them know that it's okay to do that. Yeah, this is a great opportunity for us to be vulnerable and open without revealing things that maybe we don't want to share, or maybe that aren't necessarily age appropriate yet. We can tell little kids about our mistakes and about our older grandkids about jobs that we had that were hard, what happened, about going through layoffs or being fired or being out of work. We can tell younger kids about fun disasters. What did you do when the hurricane came through? And, maybe you didn't have loss of your house or property, but maybe you lost electricity for a couple of days. And what did you guys end up doing? How did you take showers? How did you bathe? How did you do things, where you can have that perspective and look backwards? And some of those things are funny, and be sure to tell the grandkids about how you and grandma got together. Especially granddaughters love to hear that stuff, but grandsons do too. And, if you tell these stories, you get extra points from me. Let me know. You get double cool grandpa points if you're telling stories around a fun campfire during the summer. If you go camping somewhere, you're telling stories, let me know. You get double cool grandpa points. And I want to hear about that. So remember, children often assume older adults, we were always confident. We always knew what was going on. And those stories about being vulnerable, about things not working out for us, really helps build a great connection with the grandchildren. So we just want to reinforce that they don't have to be perfect. They just have to keep going. Don't give up. Keep going. It sometimes gets better, sometimes it gets worse. But if you keep going, generally you can get past the problem that you're facing. And summer traditions do matter. These aren't necessarily your big Thanksgiving, your Christmas, your different religious holidays or something, but summertime traditions do matter. One of my summertime traditions when I'd visit my grandparents were going up camping or taking an uncle's ski boat out to the reservoir and spending a day or two on the ski boat and having fun there. But some of those other traditions that you could have could be Friday pizza nights. And I mentioned the camping trips, homemade milkshakes, morning walks, going out fishing, making sure you have a fishing trip together when the grandkids are around. If it's over 4th of July, watching the fireworks together. They really do communicate permanence with the grandchildren. If they know every time we go to grandpa's house, we're doing this, that really sets that expectation. They know they can count on this activity. They know that what's expected of them after they do it a couple of times. And then you can also put them in charge, let them be grandpa's helper, let them take over. And so I want you to really be thinking about how we can take these ordinary moments and how they become, the places where our grandchildren remember our voices long after we're gone. We talk about legacy quite a bit. What a great legacy to leave those grandkids, that when they start to have grandkids, that they remember, like, oh yeah, homemade ice cream, root beer floats. That's a thing. That's what we do. That's what my grandfathers did with us. This is what I'm doing with my grandkids. And that connection is what really builds and develops that sense of family identity. And it's not because we deliver great speeches, but it's because we create those intentional moments through traditions, through being intentional, through showing up, through listening. And those strong relationships, they don't just happen accidentally. You have to work at them. You have to put in the effort. And as you do this, those relationships are going to continue to grow because of those repeated deposits of time and attention, of laughter, of listening, of those shared experiences that you put in for it. So I want to just remind you that, I want this summer to be awesome. I want this summer for you to really, if you don't have summertime traditions, start putting one or two in place. Start making sure that you're listening with those grandkids. Do activities together where they have an opportunity to open up and to talk. Ask those open-ended questions without really having any kind of pressure. And so I don't want you to get caught up that maybe you're not as wealthy as you want to be, that you're not taking the kids to all the biggest amusement parks and you're not doing all these things, because that you don't need it. Even if you've got more gold than Crassus, you just need to be focused on being intentional and making sure that your presence is felt and that those grandkids feel safe with you and they feel valuable. So the summer, invite them into your world, teach them things, laugh with them, listen more than you lecture. I've already been saying this. Create those traditions, share stories, build things together, cook together, especially cook together. Man, summertime's a great way to let grandkids experiment with hot dogs and hamburgers and all sorts of easy stuff. But cooking is a fantastic thing to do. Sorry for the, rambling there, but Most importantly, I want you to slow down enough to notice them because grandchildren rarely remember perfection, but they always remember presence. And I want to thank you today for spending your time with me. I hope that cup of coffee was good. I hope that iced tea went down smooth. And if you're out on the front porch, I hope the bugs aren't getting to you too bad. So until next time, I want you to remember to stay cool.